Okay,
Set.
media, you're all set, media?
Who else is
We're
missing?
good.
Okay, we're gonna do a 10-second. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, thank you. It's 4 o'clock. Now is the time set for the regular board meeting, the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and the Blind. 1.01 call to order. Suke, do you have the roll call?
Sure. David Nigro,
Present.
Brittany Buchanan,
Present.
Lynn Davison,
Present.
Linda Bove, Mike Gordon,
Present.
Dean Howard,
Present.
P.V. Jantz, Aaron Wonders,
Present.
and myself, Suke Kneifel, present.
All right, thank you, Suke. Next, we have 1.02 call to the public on agendized items. The minutes allowed at president's discretion for today and for other meetings. You know, we're still in the socially distant and scenario. The other thing is we were thinking about the board meetings, and you know, our synchronous time together is really important, and it's the only time that we get to come together as a board and discuss, you know, important matters, you know, matters that relate to the agency. And, you know, we want to make sure that the meetings are focused on that. So one of the things that we have for today is the public comments that get submitted are going to be sent to the website. They're going to be publicly posted on the website if they're not there already. The board was provided with the comments prior to the meeting to review. We should all review them and should have reviewed them. And the board always has an email address. If they miss the window for some reason, or if they want to send comments and it's not a regular meeting coming up, you can send an email to the board email address. So again, all those public comments are going to be on the website if they're not there already. We do have a brief summary of them, Suke, for you to read, and then we can move on.
We received a total of 13. 9 of them were on agendized items and 4 of them on non-agendized items. All comments are accessible on the website given in the agenda for this meeting and will remain public for several months. These are public comments, and the board has not reviewed these comments for factual accuracy, and the viewpoints expressed in these comments are in no way indicative of the viewpoints of ASDB, its leadership, or board. Primarily, the comments related to the opposition of offering Kelly Creasy a contract for the 22-23 school year due to her inability to communicate using ASL. One comment related to the opposition of offering Paul Creasy a contract for 22-23 due to his status as the spouse of Kelly Creasy and alleged conflict of interest due to the marriage. One comment, actually it was a group comment supporting offering Kelly Creasy a contract for 22-23. And then for the non-agendized items were related to asking the board to diversify the way in which it receives information. Also noting that audiologists in the cooperatives are blocked from connecting with families.
Thank you, Suke. And when we get to the non-agendized item, we'll just
We'll
kind of
repeat
repeat.
it?
Yeah, just repeat
Okay,
that. So
certainly.
thank you. Next, we have a 1.03 information item, Superintendent's report. Superintendent Reichman.
Good afternoon, President Nigro, members of the board, Assistant Superintendent Rex, and Assistant Superintendent Cooper, as well as the ASDB community. Welcome to our March 3rd, 2022 board meeting. I'm happy to see you all here today in person. We do have a lot to discuss this afternoon, so my report to the board will be brief. Shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. I want to start my remarks with the reminder of ASDB's mission which says, "We are committed to excellence and innovation in providing education to our students across the state of Arizona. We are also committed to excellence and innovation in our leadership team. We are committed to excellence and innovation in our collaboration with parents, with school districts, and with the community. And finally, we are committed to excellence and innovation in our partnership with other state agencies. Our mission recognizes the significance of leadership. Our leadership. We are to drive our work. Our leadership drives our work toward that mission. The mission cannot be accomplished without good leadership. Your task is to focus on ASDB leadership this evening. When I started as superintendent almost 6 years ago, my focus was on prioritization. We needed to rebuild ASDB from its foundation all the way up. At that time, I focused heavily on school improvement for both of our campuses. I focused on our early learning program because of the importance of early language acquisition for our deaf and hard of hearing children and students, as well as the importance of independent living skills for our blind and visually impaired children and students. We also focused on the 5 regional cooperatives. We wanted that cooperative program to become a statewide itinerant services program and support those 3 primary programs on an operational level. For example, our vehicles needed better management. When I started 5 years ago, some of our state cars were not safe. They were not reliable because proper maintenance was not being done. And today, we have safe, reliable transportation for all of our teachers and staff. We focused on building renewal, meaning if something was worn out on campus, we had the funds available to replace those situations, those issues. If an air conditioner unit went out, we were able to replace that unit. We focused on budget management to ensure that we had adequate funding based on data so that we were able to report accurately. And then we could use that data to make better decisions on how we used our fiscal resources. Those were my priorities. I will readily admit that I did not prioritize ASL, American Sign Language, and our deaf community and deaf culture. I acknowledge the importance of American Sign Language, our deaf community, and deaf culture. I completely understand the importance of those things. It's just that when I started 6 years ago, I took a look at the agency as a whole, and I felt very strongly that we needed to rebuild our foundation first. Our foundation was our schools and our early learning program and our regional cooperatives. We needed to rebuild our systems to support our educational services for our students. So I chose not to prioritize those other things. Those public comments about the principals on campuses not learning American Sign Language, that is on me. I did not set that expectation. I set other expectations for the principal of Tucson campus, and she met all of the expectations that I set. Today, your task is to look at all of these proposed contracts for renewal. I wanted to share with you what happened 5 years ago. 5 years ago, in March of 2017, the ASDB Board of Directors received feedback from 5 staff members who were working on the Tucson campus. Those 5 staff members expressed concern about the principal of the Arizona School for the Deaf. That principal could sign fluently in American Sign Language. That principal was involved with the deaf community and knew deaf culture. That principal went to all of the deaf schools' games and was committed to her students. And she had a son who was deaf as well. Those 5 staff members shared their concerns about the principal and her leadership of the Arizona School for the Deaf. The ASDB Board of the Directors at that time chose not to renew her contract. So, what could we then do? We started a nationwide search for a qualified candidate to bring in to Tucson campus and become the principal of the Arizona School for the Deaf. We did an extensive search and we did not find a qualified candidate. We tried again a second time. We did another nationwide search. We did find a qualified candidate to run the Arizona School for the Deaf. We did not find anyone. We failed. So I chose to have a meeting with Principal Creasy. She was the principal of the Arizona School for the Blind. I asked her if she would be willing to assume responsibility for the Arizona School for the Deaf. Fortunately, she said yes. For the last 5 years, she has run both schools. She has been involved with school improvement. She has focused on setting high expectations for our students because we want our students to graduate and go to college or be career ready. She has been involved with selection of curriculum for English, math, science, and we were beginning the BGC, Bilingual Grammar Curriculum. We started that when COVID hit and the pandemic happened. Our schools, as you know, at that time had to close. Over the last 2 years, she has focused on getting students back to school, having students come to school every day, and at the same time, keeping our students safe, and our teachers and staff as well. That has been the last 5 years. She has met all of my expectations. I did not set an expectation for her to learn American Sign Language. That is on me. We are now an agency, ASDB, starting to address the importance of American Sign Language within our agency, as well as deaf culture and the deaf community. Tomorrow, we have our first meeting for 2 new committees. The first committee will be focused on developing a language policy for ASDB. So they will be analyzing how we can approach this topic to make sure that all of our staff, both deaf and hearing, have the same level of access to communication and language. And that will involve integrating ASL into our daily communication. The second committee will focus on accessibility, making sure that all of our staff and students have the same level of access to information and what's going on in their environment. We are just now starting to address these issues. From my perspective, ASDB is now finally ready to begin integrating those important aspects into our agency. So this afternoon, as you, the board, consider contract renewals of our leadership team, I hope that you recognize that I recommend contract renewal because I have complete faith and confidence in our leadership team. If I didn't, I would not be recommending that their contracts be renewed. So that is the first thing I would like for you to consider. The second thing I would like for you to consider is if you as the board decide not to renew a contract for an individual, it will be exceedingly challenging to find a good leader to replace that individual. And that concludes my report to the board.
Thank you, Superintendent Reichman. Are there any questions for the superintendent? Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to 1.04, information item, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, Dr. Rex.
Good afternoon, President Nigro and board members. You've received my report for this meeting, but I would like to add the following information to align our current reality in our educational programs. In our birth to 3, we are still not fully serving families in the home as a majority. After 24 months, we are just beginning to have the metrics we need to return in person. Some families have been able to meet in person, but we are ramping up to actually start going into the homes again and doing the important work that we do. On our preschool at both campuses, we have been working hard, but I wanted to make you aware that at our PDSD campus, it has operated without 3 teachers and 3 IAs since October. The Birth to 5 program is down 2 admins, and we are currently recruiting for those positions. Coverage for absences has been taken on by our supervising teachers and our directors as we have no subs. And our Tucson campus staff has even gone up to provide coverage at the PDSD campus. Our HI and VI teachers are still assessing our students and developing progress reports, and will be part of the data that we put in the strategic plan for you all in July. ASDB Tucson and PDSD campus has just completed their benchmark 3 testing. The principals are preparing for spring testing and end of the year activities once they return from spring break. Our statewide itinerant program update. Interviews for Region 3 Director will be taking place in March. And statewide Director Jay Johnson hopes to bring a name to the board to be able to hire a Region 3 Director in May. Also, the regions are working on their statewide advisory council meetings. Those are being set. The data is being collected and finalized for meetings. I believe it's happening in April, our statewide meetings. The ODD team focused on getting our BGC curriculum fully implemented and embedded in our ELA block at both of our campuses. ASDB staff continues to work with Boston University staff resources for support and are looking to build a sustainable system to address the language barriers and ensure kids are getting quality instruction. ODD also has been working with the Arizona Department of Education to ensure accessibility for our students when they do their spring testing. Our kids have been tested more this year than any year that I remember. It's been amazing how we've been able to pivot and create opportunities for kids to do these field tests to help support the accessibility and to help ADE. As our principals and directors continue to constantly do contact tracing, navigate substitute issues, continue to work through the teacher shortages, teacher sickness when they're out with COVID or because they were a direct contact of COVID. Our directors and principals continue to lead and offer as much grace and support to alleviate the chronic stress that our staff is experiencing. And that is my report.
Thank you, Dr. Rex. Are there any questions for Dr. Rex and her report? Hearing none, we'll move on to 1.05, information item, Assistant Superintendent of Agency Operations and Support Services, Assistant Superintendent Cooper.
Good afternoon, Board President Nigro, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex, members of the board, and the ASDB community. Each of the directors have provided to you their departmental reports. There are no additional information that has come forth since the reports have been provided to you last week. It has been mentioned, though, on a few occasions. I continually and actively work with several of the staff to analyze the current staff compensation structure to ensure internal equity and external competitiveness. I mentioned at the January 20th board meeting that we will be proposing at the July 7th board meeting a request to increase the hourly rates for our instructional assistants as well as our technical aid interveners to eliminate the compression issues for our entry-level positions that come from the minimum wage changes and to ensure the pay rates for various positions are aligned with various market studies. We will also be proposing to increase the hourly rate for staff that are grade 9 and below. This would be for job titles such as our chaperones, administrative secretaries, security staff, warehouse clerks, night supervisors, as well as our residential service assistants and other position classifications within the agency. With board approval, the increase in the hourly rates would become effective with the new fiscal year, which begins on July 1, and impact approximately 140 staff members. We are still looking at other salary schedules within the agency, and this project will last us realistically about 2 to 3 years. This would allow us to remain competitive with other employers across the state and help us to be able to recruit and retain our staff within the agency. Within my report, I have also included updates on the agency's strategic plan on Pillar 4, effective resource management. It's been said plenty of times that this pillar is unique in that it covers and supports all of the key areas for the implementation of our agency strategic plan in order for us to be successful, where we would be able to make optimal use of our agency resources. And that would consist of optimizing people, our time, the technology, facilities, financial, and other resources effectively and efficiently to make sure that we are enhancing the student learning as well as supporting our improvement goals. Within Pillar 4, we do have 4 objectives. The overarching goal is to make sure that we're providing our highest quality education for our students by examining the resource management through human resources, managing our capital resources, identifying the technology improvements, and maximizing our financial resources. The first objective, if you recall, is to optimize human resources by hiring the most qualified people for all of our positions within the agency. The HR team has been very busy with the current recruitment season and have been doing in-person as well as virtual events. They have also been actively working on onboarding, assisting with professional and leadership development, training, and also looking at retention and recruitment strategies. Our second objective is to effectively manage our capital resources to ensure that our facilities as well as our fleet meet the educational as well as our fiscal objectives. One of the ways that we're doing that is through our master facilities plan that we're working to develop, and that'll help guide the long-term development and maintenance of our aging facilities. Our goal has been to design a finalized plan in fiscal year 20 or by fiscal year 2024. And the other initiative is the management of our fleet, which Superintendent Reichman just touched upon, where we're also monitoring the utilization of the fleet, making sure that preventive maintenance is addressed, and ensuring that we're complying with the Fleet Council's 10-point replacement methodology. The third objective is to identify technology improvements, as well as integrating the training for all of our staff members. Last school year, there were about 45 training opportunities that were offered. And for this current school year so far, we've done, I believe, approximately 3. The IT department, along with our agency's instructional technology specialists, continue to collaborate and have been tracking the technology training needs across the agency, and we are monitoring the training satisfaction through surveys. Our final objective is to maximize the financial resources by improving our student learning and meeting our current as well as our future needs of the agency's priorities, but also making sure that we're being fiscally sound and responsible. We have identified specific outcome measures, which would consist of identifying the number of students enrolled in our day, as well as our residential program, identifying the number of students by disability type. We're also showing the percentage of classroom and non-classroom spend, and we are also showing the average cost per student for each of those various programs on an annual basis. So we're beginning to do that. We have, since the implementation of the strategic plan, have identified some of those outcome measures to be changed, and we will be reporting on those in the near future. But we're also looking at staffing as well as caseloads across the agency. In that report, you'll see most of the 2020 as well as the 2021 data has been provided, and we are still working through providing the current school year and budget fiscal year information. And that concludes my report for today.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Cooper? Well, hearing none, I have a couple of questions and maybe really comments. I know last time, in our last meeting, we had discussion of the cost per student, and you had given us the total classroom spending of the cost per student, and I wanted to know where all the rest of the money was. And we had some correspondence, and you showed me where the rest of it was, and we talked about providing the cost per student in a manner that was consistent with the way the Arizona Auditor General does their calculations for every other school district. And that made a lot of sense. And you produced to the board via email last month revised cost per students. which is excellent, and thank you for doing that. I do think we should have something like this report in the finance report,
Yes.
which is going to come a little bit later. The only comment I have is in the report today, you have our strategic plan 4.4.4 reporting, and the breakdown of programs is a bit different than what we have on this report that you'd given us in February. It's really, the difference is, I'll pull up that report. The difference is that you've separated out ELP, birth to 3, and then preschool. So in the
Yes.
report we have, they're all together. And you've separated out residential program from Tucson campus. So there's Tucson campus line item, and there's a residential program Tucson campus line item. Is that, I guess, one, if you can tell me what the difference between those two categories is. Is the residential program the cost per student that is also participating in the residential program, or what's the difference between those two categories?
No, it was asked for us to be able to specifically, of our student count that we have on the Tucson campus, as well as the number of FTEs and our expenditures, what is exclusive only to the residential dorms, as well as what's exclusive of the other. So I separated that out to show just the dorms. I will acknowledge that there is additional information that was not considered at the time the information was presented at the last Finance Committee meeting, and I acknowledge that we would want to include, for example, our nighttime nurses, our nighttime security staff, as well as allocating the facilities based on the square footage. So we're going to be modifying that information in the upcoming, and remember, that report is done on an annual basis.
Right.
But I did want to at least acknowledge, and I touched upon it in my report, that is one of the ones that we will be changing. Now, respective to the early learning program, yes, you are correct in that originally in the report that was provided a couple of weeks ago, that we combined both programs together, both birth to 3 and preschool, and I wanted to be able to accurately show between both student populations what the student count, or excuse me, cost per student would be for birth to 3, and then what would be for preschool. Does that answer your question?
Well, that answers the question, certainly. I think I'd want these classifications moved into the other more detailed report, that we get. Because right now, like the early learning program is kind of lumped together. And that's a big
Yes.
difference. Birth to 3, $8,500, preschool over $40,000. That's a big difference. The cost of PDSD, $50,000, $750. That's exactly the same as that other report. And we see how that breaks down in that report. It's just in Tucson campus, we have Tucson campus excluding residential program, and then residential program, and we one at $203,000 per student and one at $29,000 per student. I want to see what one, I think it would be helpful to have ADM for each of those programs, although I don't necessarily know that we have ADM for, for the ELP program, but, the average daily membership, I want to have that, so that we can see what the ADM is associated with the Tucson campus, excluding residential versus the residential program Tucson campus.
Well, I will acknowledge we do not have ADM. We just received the institutional voucher, so unlike school districts, we do not get the ADM.
oh, no,
but
I
I would
understand.
be able to show that for
Right, I understand we
you.
don't have ADM like school districts have ADM, but we have our, we have something equivalent to ADM. we'll put
The
it that way.
voucher rate
Yeah,
based on each disability type, yes, I can show that for you.
okay, great, thank you.
Now, are you asking to see that on a consistent basis, more so in the Finance Committee reports, or?
I would like to have the average cost per student once per year. I think that's helpful. We don't need to have it every meeting, but once per year would be helpful, because that gives the numbers behind the
Yes.
4.4. If this is the top level report of 4.4, we at least want to support that with a more detailed report, just annually, once the fiscal year, whenever the next meeting after the end of the fiscal year.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for, for resolving that and for your work in the interim to make sure that we, got consistent reporting with the Auditor General.
Thank you.
All right, if there are no other questions, we are going to go to 2.01, action item, approval of the consent agenda consistent with board policy to include items 3.02, 6.02, 6.01, 6.02, 6.03, 6.04, 6.05, 6.06, 6.07, 6.08, 6.09, 6.10, 6.11, 6.12, 6.13, 7.02, 7.04, and 7.05. So the first thing is there anyone that would like to remove any of these items from the consent agenda?
This is Commissioner Jantz. I would like to remove, or excuse me, propose that we remove 6.03, excuse me, 6.13 from the consent agenda.
6.13. Okay, and 6.13, that is the intent to offer all the teacher employment contracts.
Correct.
Are there any other suggestions? And again, we'll have two rounds here. One, we'll all vote to remove certain items from the consent agenda, and then we'll move to vote on the consent agenda. Are there any other items that someone would like to pull from the consent agenda?
Yes. I think it would behoove us to pull 6.11 and 6.07 for discussion.
Okay, 6.11 and 6.07. Okay, are there any others? Okay, so I will move to remove 6.13. I'll need to write this down, there's so many. 6.11 and 6.07 from the consent agenda. Is there a second for that?
I second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Okay, so that motion passes. So those are now removed from the consent agenda. Are there anyone would like to take discussion on the consent agenda, or otherwise we could have a motion to pass the consent agenda?
This is Commissioner Jantz. I would like to discuss specific items related to, one moment please, 6.01, 6.02, 6.03, 0.04, etc. I just wanted to raise a point. I have noticed that these are all one-year contract renewal recommendations. At the previous board meeting, we had discussed, or Superintendent Reichman had mentioned that she would be in support of 2-year contracts. So I would like to know why these are one-year renewal recommendations.
So I guess, our item now is we're just discussing whether or not to pass the consent agenda or remove certain things, and not particular. We're not discussing individual offers and the terms of the individual offers in these points. All I can say is that the superintendent is bringing to the board one-year contracts consistent with the practice of the agency going back many years.
Okay, this is Commissioner Jantz. I would like to caution that the board needs to be very considerate of the current economic situation, and we need to make sure that we are doing our best to keep these employees on our leadership team that we have, to keep our 2 campuses and our itinerant programs running effectively. We cannot afford to lose our executive leadership team. We cannot spread the message that we would override Superintendent Reichman's preferences. I think that we need to be cautious and ensure that we are doing our best to retain those employees who are doing their jobs well. So I just think that we need to make sure that we are trying our very best to keep them. And doing so on an annual basis is not sustainable. They need to know that they have job security. So that is a concern that I have with a one-year contract. Understanding that historically that has been done, I do understand that. But with the job market as it is, I don't think that is the best approach.
Okay, thank you, PV. I move that we pass the consent agenda item, or the consent agenda as edit, or as modified by the previous vote.
This is Dean, I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Opposed, Commissioner Jantz.
There's one. And any abstentions? No? Okay, that motion passes. Next up, item 3.01, information discussion item, early intervention contract with Desert Voices, Assistant Superintendent Dr. Rex.
Good afternoon. I'm actually going to introduce Dr. Kendra Benedict, who will be walking you through the contract with Desert Voices.
Is this where I'm supposed to be? Okay. May I take my mask off? Okay, thank you. Hi, good afternoon, President Nigro, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex, and Assistant Superintendent Cooper. Thank you for having me here this afternoon. At our last board meeting, we had the CEO from FBC, Jared Kittleson, and we had the Executive Director from Desert Voices here to explain to us a little bit more about our relationship with them and what they're doing for the children that we all collectively serve. It's my understanding that there were some questions that came from that, wanting to better understand the contract that we have with Desert Voices. I'd like to clarify that the 4 different contracts we have between those 2 entities right now. We have both preschool and birth to 3 contracts with both of them. Both Desert Voices and FBC provide IEP services that we receive institutional vouchers for, and that is how we send those children to FBC and Desert Voices for preschool. For our early intervention services, birth to 3, FBC is the ASIP recognized provider for IFSP services. Desert Voices is not a recognized ASIP provider. That is a service that we offer families in addition to other resources that we can make available to them to access individuals or professionals that have expertise in listening and spoken language. So that contract is not, those service units that those individuals, those providers that Desert Voices give our families are not recognized by ASIP as IFSP services. We have contracts with both Desert Voices and Carla Zimmerman Speech Therapy. Those contracts were initiated a number of years prior to my arrival here. They were initiated because at the time the board had given us the direction that we really needed to strengthen our listening and spoken language program, and we did not have expertise at the time in that, so that is when those contracts started. Since that time, we have increased our capacity in-house to provide those types of services, and we are at a level now that is very commensurate with what Desert Voices and Zimmerman provide, but we do still continue to provide those services for families should they choose. That's a very broad overview. I'm happy to answer any questions. I want to make sure I use your time well and then narrow in on exactly what it is that you're wanting to know more about.
Okay. Are there any questions for Dr. Benedict? I guess my question is, so Desert Voices and Carla Zimmerman are not certified to provide IFSP services, is that right?
They are certainly certified in their respective fields.
Certified in their
Yeah,
respective
yeah,
fields, but
yeah.
not to, okay, so
Yes.
but not to provide the IFSP services.
Right, they are not recognized because ASIP has speech-language pathologists as part of the early intervention teams. And so that's what they provide. The funding that we receive from ASIP does not help to cover Desert Voices or Zimmerman, only our FBC contract for birth to 3.
Okay, so with the FBC contract, right, that, I understand that. So when we pay for Desert Voices for 0 to 3, that's from our general fund, is that correct? The general appropriations?
I'm going to lean to
Oh.
Assistant Superintendent Cooper here, so I don't misspeak.
For the birth to 3 contracts, yes, that's correct. We do use our
Okay.
general fund. For the preschool contract with Desert Voices, we do use our voucher funds.
Okay. Right, yeah, for the preschool. And the reason I'm interested in 0 to 3 is, we heard last week from Ms. Chapman was, the earlier these children enter the program, the better language acquisition they have.
Right.
And language acquisition is, it's like almost half of one pillar. It's a huge piece of our strategic plan, and we really want to focus in language acquisition. And for the parents who choose, the services that the Desert Voices provides. So what's preventing, and I know that is not fully funded, that's what Ms. Chapman told us, is that they will pay for a certain amount of time, but not the full amount of time that's recommended, per week, and not transportation, those types of things. So what's preventing us from doing that to support those families that choose those types of services, either from Desert Voices or from Carlos Zimmerman, or from the agency's internal, capabilities in that regard? I don't care who's providing it, but why aren't we fully supporting those parents?
I think in the agency's perspective, and from what I have come to learn the last few years, again, we entered into those contracts because we did not have the ability to provide those services, and we do now. And so we are providing those services, and then as icing on the cake, we also make that available to families so they have numerous options. What they do and what we do is a little different in that, of course, we go into homes, or of course for the last 2 years through teleintervention, where their therapies are all provided in a clinic, and we are mandated by IDEA Part C to provide services to families in the natural environment, and the home is what is considered the natural environment. The clinic setting is not. We could not set up services in-house in a clinic to avoid our providers having to travel so much. It might seem on the surface it would make sense to have a clinic type program, but that would not be recognized by ASIP as appropriate. We have to do those services in-house.
Right, and that's, certainly the money from ASIP has, restrictions on it, and we can do that. But I guess the question is, what's from stopping us to committing additional agency resources to get some of these children more time to acquire language, if that's what they need, and that's what we've been told? What's the obstacle to getting that to happen?
I think it would just take us as an agency, as a leadership team, and as the board to sit back and look at all of the different priorities within the ELP. They are numerous. We have a rising population of children with multiple disabilities, deaf and additional disabilities, blind with additional disabilities, and kids in rural areas that we are having difficulty reaching. And so I think it's just looking at all that we have to do, looking at our fiscal resources and prioritizing. I don't think anything is necessarily stopping us. It's just looking at what we want to do as an agency and as a board.
Okay, right, because it looks like the numbers aren't that many. I mean, it doesn't seem that there's a high utilization of Desert Voices or Carlos Zimmerman right now. And if that's the natural state of things, that's fine. But if there are parents that are being held back for, a financial reason, and we have the ability to support those parents, I at least want to look into what that would be, because I don't think it would cost that much more to do it if we're talking about that limited number of students, but we'd see so much of a greater improvement in their language acquisition and not set them up to go to kindergarten or preschool and have very little language.
Right. It's important to recognize, though, as well, that both Zimmerman and Desert Voices, they do serve a specific population. They are a private institution, and they target a specific population that they have the ability to serve, and they do a phenomenal job at that. We as ASDB, are charged with serving children whose families have chosen all different methods and modes of communication, approaches to learning, approaches to language acquisition. And so to look at our numbers and then look at the numbers that go to Desert Voices and Zimmerman, it's somewhat apples and oranges, because it's not appropriate for everyone. And I think they would say the same thing too.
Right, now that's certainly the case. There are other language modalities that we teach and that they don't. I guess my focus on that is not to limit our own instruction. I think we should, if children need more time in that 0 to 3 to acquire ASL, if we're not giving that service time, we should look at that as well.
Right.
But I want to make sure that we're that we're allocating agency resources appropriately to focus on language acquisition at an early age, whatever the modality that is.
And I think it would be wonderful to sit down and look at that. I would just ask that we do that in consideration of all of the needs of all of the children in our program and not just on this sector, because we have needs all over the state and with all disability categories.
That's certainly true.
Yeah.
This is Board Member Jantz.
Okay.
I would like to say that we need to be careful about making assumptions on that clinical environment. It's not a natural environment. And so I would like to say that over the last 100 years or so, the clinical approach to deaf education has not been very successful. Research has shown that the natural environment is the best place for language acquisition. And when it comes to Desert Voices and Carla Zimmerman, if it's not provided in the natural environment, that isn't something that we should push too hard for. If they wanted to modify their business approach to be in the natural environment and to support the current research with language acquisition, I don't want to spend too much time and resources on that, and especially the small number. I don't think that's a wise use of agency resources.
Sorry, this is Dean. Not to get into too much of a debate on historical reference to where this agency's been in the last 7 or 8 years since I've been on the board with 0 to 3 and listen and spoken language. That last statement kind of blows me away as a parent of someone who went through Desert Voices. So with that said, there's a lot of discussions back and forth about Desert Voices and Zimmerman coming in, explaining the program, staff explaining the program. What I've kind of observed is there's a lot of missing pieces that even I'm confused as to what we're really providing on 0 to 3. Almost to the point, I hate to even use the word work session because I'm getting torn in two different directions because I see both points of view, and I think so much has changed in the last 7 or 8 years in both programs here at ASDB and at Zimmerman and Desert Voices, that is there adequate discussion to be had to say, all right, full stop, where are we in this? Because I got a bunch of questions in relation to, for example, and I can just read these out because I wrote these down in anticipation of this, or is it better for us to get in a work session and ask a lot of questions about where we are in these programs? Because these are solid questions, financial pieces, apples to apples. Why is Desert Voices not getting the same hours for students that ASDB students are being? What's changed in your program than the last time we were brought to this information? So back to my original question on the dirty word of work session, is there an opportunity for us to have that? I think it's a valuable use of time for us to look at this.
I know we just had the early learning work session in November, and so there's maybe a couple of other things. That's not saying we can't have it again, or something that's more focused again later in the year. But I think we'd have to bring it back up in the summer when we set our work session for the, at the next meeting when we set up the second half of the year work sessions.
Okay, and with that, this is Dean again, I'd like to add two pieces into that. When we do have the discussion, is there a way that we can analyze the current contracts with Desert Voices and Zimmerman in a way that will allow us to explore the current resources that we are doing to free up, more efficiently serve birth to 3 across the state, and those families that do not choose listen and spoken language as their communication modality. That's the first thing I'd like to maybe have addressed. And then also, if we could also address professional development plans for ALSL and ASL and telecommunication. I'm just not sure if we've got that built into the program as well. So as we get into those discussions, those are 2 points I'd like to have.
Okay.
If I could.
Dr. Benedict?
Did someone else have something?
Board Member Jansen, I would like to address Howard and your comments. I think I'd just like to clarify, the issue is not about the program in and of themselves. And it's not a debate about listening and spoken language or communication modality approaches, but rather the fact that Carla Zimmerman and Desert Voices, their services are provided in a clinical environment. And research has shown for language acquisition, the best place for that is in a more natural home environment. Any natural environment for that kid and their upbringing. Obviously, as a parent, you have provided a wonderful natural environment for your child to acquire language, and that's the key to emphasize, is that natural environment for the child to acquire their language. The issue from my perspective isn't necessarily about the programs in and of themselves, but their service program. So if they're only providing services within the clinical setting, AZIP will not recognize their program. So then should we change that? I don't think so. Internally, we've improved our own abilities to provide these services, and so maybe we need to have the conversation of why Carla Zimmerman and Desert Voices don't provide those services in the natural environment and why they're only providing that in a clinical environment. Maybe that's why parents have chosen not to have them as a service provider, because they simply don't want the clinical environment.
This is Dean. That's a fair assessment. I'd love to explore that further for sure.
Oh, Dr. Benedict?
I just wanted to address one of your questions that you had about the LSL certification. I do have those numbers that are current for you, and this is for both Desert Voices and ASDB. So Desert Voices currently has 8 teachers and SLPs combined. 7 are teachers, 1 is an SLP. Of those 8 staff members, 2 of them are fully certified in listening and spoken language, and 3 are listening and spoken language candidates, so they should finish their program within a year or 2. ASDB, we have 36 teachers and SLPs statewide. In Region 2 specifically, if we want to compare just the Phoenix area, because that's the only area where Zimmerman and Desert Voices serve, we have 18 staff. We have 1 in-house certified listening and spoken language therapist, and then we have 4 LSL candidates who are currently being mentored as part of our Mentor Protege program through ODD. They expanded that to include formal mentoring of our LSL candidates, and so that they're in their second year, middle of their second year, and so we will soon enough have 5 in-house certified staff.
Thank you, Dr. Benedict, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Our next item is 4.01 information item, finance report.
Good afternoon, Board President Nigro, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex, Assistant Superintendent Cooper, members of the board, and the ASDB community. Our most recent Finance Committee meeting was held last Thursday, February 24th, with board members Aaron Wonders, Mike Gordon, P.B. Jantz. Also in attendance were Superintendent Reichman and Assistant Superintendent Cooper. During the meeting, we reviewed detail and discussed the updated cost per student report, the January 2022-2021 budget to actual comparison reports, the available cash balance, student enrollment, student and teacher ratios, filled full-time equivalents, and the grant revenues and expenditure reports, along with the second quarter basic financial statements for December 31, 2021 and 2022. The February reports are not available at this time. The cost per student by area that was discussed earlier was historically determined by classroom spend. Based on questions received at the last board meeting, we looked at what was done previously and provided the report showing classroom spend as well as non-classroom spend, which includes transportation and facilities. In the report, the non-classroom spend also includes administration and statewide programs allocated between the different areas by a percentage. This report was based on the 2021 financial reports and student enrollment. The total FTE at that time was 539, with a budgeted FTE of 562. The financial reports provided to each of you is the same as the financial data that was provided to the Finance Committee, but in a more condensed, summarized version. The original budget for fiscal year 2022 has been revised from $60.7 million to $61.2 million, with most of the increase in professional and outside services. These increased expenses stem from a food service contract established in July of 2021 to cover breakfast and lunch programs, the contract transportation service to help with the increased routes and the current bus driver shortage, and the increase in the contracted daily rate for the blind and visually impaired preschool education services. As referenced on page 1 of the financial report, as of February 1st, 2022, ASDB had 2,178 students enrolled, a decrease of 28 students when compared to last year's enrollment of 2,206. You can see there's a decreased enrollment of 56 students between the site-based campuses, preschool, and birth to 3, while the regional cooperative services enrollment has increased by 28 students. On page 2, you'll see February 1st, 2022, we had 509.43 filled full-time equivalents, which includes 8.5 teachers from FBC and 741 staff members. There are approximately 96 vacancies actively being recruited for. This includes 22 teachers, 21 instructional assistants, 12 interpreters, 11 bus drivers, and 30 other various positions. Page 3 begins the financial summary based on the comparative data for December 31, 2021 and 2022. 2020. The budget fiscal year 2022 collected revenue of $9.7 million was $1 million or 19% lower compared to budget fiscal year 2021 of $11.5 million. This was due to a delay in receiving the voucher and fee for services revenue. The total obligated expenditures were $28.4 million for budget fiscal year 2022, a reduction of $2.5 million when compared to budget fiscal year 2021 total obligated expenditures of $30.9 million. During budget fiscal year 2022, we had a reduction of payroll, food, other operating expenses, equipment, and capital expenditures of $3.6 million, offset by an increase in professional services, travel, and transfers out of $1.1 million. Page 6 of the report shows the budget to actual expenditures as well as remaining budget balances by object class, by fund, and by program. The reports on page 7 and 8 show the actual expenditures by object class and by fund. Page 7 has the expenditures by program, and page 8 has the expenditures by operational area. The instructional and student support account for 63% of the total expenditures, and agency administration accounts for 12%. The remaining expenditures are for residential facilities, transportation, food, and statewide services. Page 15 begins the financial summary for January 31, 2022 and 2021. The collected revenues are $16.1 million, which is $2.1 million or 15.1% higher than this time 2021. The increase is primarily in the Prop 301 funds, Medicaid, and the land endowment. The obligated expenditures are $33.8 million or 55.6% of the budget fiscal year 2022 revised budget of $61.2. This is a decrease of $1.4 million when compared to budget fiscal year budget 2021 obligated expenditures of $35.2 million. The decrease is primarily due to one less payroll, a decrease in equipment purchases of $1.2 million because of the purchases of the vehicles in budget fiscal year 2021, And this is offset by an increase in professional and outside services of 1.2 million for the contracted transportation and food services. Page 17 has the budget to actual expenditures as well as the remaining budget balance by object class, fund, and program. On page 18, the program expenditures are distributed by object class and fund, and page 19 has the expenditures by object class and by fund. The instructional and student services account for 63%, and the agency administration accounts for 11% as of January 31, 22, compared to 68% for instructional and student services and 12% for agency administration as of January 31st, 2021. Page 22 has the budget fiscal year 2022 budget status report for all sources as of January 31, 2022 and 2021. The budget fiscal year 2022 actual revenues were $29 million compared to $27.7 million in budget fiscal year 2021. The major differences were $362,000 increase in federal grant revenue, $960,000 increase in Prop 301 funds, resulting from 3 months of revenue received in budget fiscal year 2022 compared to 1 month during budget fiscal year 2021. The budget fiscal year 2022 actual expenditures and encumbrances were $33.8 million compared to $31.1 million in budget fiscal year 2021. You will also note that the current deficit of $1.5 million in budget fiscal year 2022 compared to $3.3 million in 2021, which means we are spending less of our cash balance. In summary, based on a review of the financial data, there are no immediate material concerns based on what is known of the remainder of the budget fiscal year. If there are no questions, this concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we'll move on. And our next item is 6.07, intent to offer fiscal year 2023 employment contract to Jay Johnson, Director of Itinerant Services, pursuant to ARS 38-431-03A1. The board may vote to go into executive session for the purpose of discussion and consideration of employment matters. I do have to say, when in this exception, the individual that will be discussed has the ability to opt to have what is typically a private discussion, because we're going to bring up potentially sensitive information in public. And I believe that Mr. Johnson has asked that we not go into executive session and we do this in the open. I have a list. Let's see. So I have that as open. Is that correct, Letitia? Okay, so we will not be able to go into executive session to discuss what are typically considered sensitive discussions of employee job performance and behavior and conduct. Okay. Is there anyone that'd like to make any statements?
My concern comes from a number of phone calls, emails that I've received from staff. I think just to get at a basic issue, and not just with Jay, but there's so many of our administrators who have no deaf education background, no background in audiology, interpreters, blind, low vision, deaf and blind, and there's decisions being made, directives being given that aren't in alignment with how you teach deaf, hard of hearing children. There's concerns about audiology, how they can't use the booths anymore. Everything has to be taken to The campuses were not getting good evaluations. There have been a lot of concerns, and I just wanted an open discussion. We've gotten the comments from the public. I hear them. And it was just more to make sure that we're focusing on providing best practices, that we're doing what's best for our kids, and I don't want to lose staff. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Are there others? No. Well, I've taken a look at this. Mr. Johnson was hired in April 2020, and I think there's a few things the board needs to know. In October of 2020, I received personally an anonymous letter voicing leadership concerns regarding the itinerant ASDB leadership. It noted that audiological testing was only indicated every 3 years instead of annually, and there was a concern that would allow further hearing loss to escape detection. The letter referred to authoritarian leadership and indicated that the letter was anonymous for fear of reprisals. I forwarded the letter to the superintendent for follow-up. I did not receive any follow-up. Also, in October 2020, the superintendent received a different anonymous letter regarding concerns about Mr. Johnson. Dr. Rex attempted to verify the issues raised in the letter, but doing so is difficult with an anonymous letter. That letter included a statement that Mr. Johnson is and I'm quoting from the letter, a bully who is not showing respect for the audiologists, interpreters, HI teachers, VI teachers, and O&M specialists he is tasked with supervising. Last month, as I understand it, Mr. Johnson received a written complaint from a subordinate who complained that she was verbally reprimanded and allegedly berated in front of other ASDB employees. Also last month, we received a notice of an EEOC complaint filed by a former employee who reported to Mr. Johnson. We do not have the perfected charge, so we do not know the substance of the complaint. I note that the superintendent has not hired a new ombudsperson, so the agency has been operated without one for quite some time. We are therefore without any knowledge of other issues that may have been brought to the ombudsperson that staff may be afraid of bringing through other channels. We further had the issue of interpreters raised in January. We heard from Mr. Johnson at our last meeting. We heard the details of his revised policy, but I did not hear that he investigated whether the new policy was compliant with federal law. Fortunately, based on our current understanding of the law and the facts as we now know them, no compliance issues have been identified. However, this appears to have been by luck and not by design. So the board should be aware of these facts. By asking the board to offer Mr. Johnson a contract, the superintendent is affirming this, again, alleged behavior and conduct. And it may be that the board agrees, but it is important that the board consider all points of information before offering a contract for the leadership position. Hiring is ultimately the board's decision. It is not the superintendent's position.
Excuse me, this is Commissioner Jantz. Can I have a point of clarification, please?
Mm-hmm.
The statements that you were just making, was this your opinion, or where is this information coming from?
Which piece of information?
I guess all of it, what you just read out. I would like to clarify, was all of that from the anonymous letter, or was some of that your own perspective as well?
No, I didn't. That was not my perspective. I'd received a letter, and as I described, what was in that first letter is what was in that first letter. The agency received a second anonymous letter. It happened to be the same month. And what I described as being in that second letter is in that second letter. So these are incidents that occurred, 2 in October 2020 and 2 that occurred last month, or we were aware of them last month.
Thank you. This is Superintendent Reichman. I would just like to say that our policy does not permit me to use the feedback that comes from anonymous sources.
Yeah, Superintendent Reichman, I understand, and that's why we have the ombudsperson, right? So we don't have the issues of investigating allegations from an anonymous letter. It's really hard to do that.
This is Commissioner Jantz. I would like to mention that the board had a conversation previously and chose not to fill the ombudsperson position with the understanding that the state had an ombudsperson available and that we would utilize that resource. So I'm wondering, President Nigro, if you would recommend that the complainants or those with concerns take those to the state ombudsperson.
We had discussions previously about hiring, going through the hiring process, which the state procurement process, which we did. That ultimate person decided not to take that job, and there haven't been any efforts to fill the ombudsperson role.
This is Commissioner James. I'm still wondering, though, we do, to my understanding, have a state ombudsperson. And there is a process there that any state employee, regardless of agency, if they work at ASDB or the itinerant program, can access that state ombudsperson. So did you recommend that resource to the people who sent you these letters?
I don't know who sent me these letters. That is the problem.
This is
Superintendent Reichman.
Superintendent Reichman. I would like to mention that the ombudsperson is to report to the board. So if you, as the board, want ASDB to have an ombudsperson, then the board can make that vote and direct me to figure out how to do that. And I would do that, of course.
Superintendent Reichman, this is David Nigro. I mean, we do have the policy that we'll have one. Again, that the purpose of this discussion is not the ombudsperson, so I don't want to get too much into that. I just wanted to note that at no time during this, in the last year and a half, did we have a functioning ombudsperson.
President Nigro,
Yes.
as direct supervisor for Jay Johnson, I have completed his evaluation. Any areas that I have asked him to improve upon, he has improved upon. Any written complaints or discussions that the person wanted to actually work through the process, I have taken care of. Improvement areas have been met, and he is in good standing to receive a contract.
Okay. I mean, that's good to hear, Dr. X. I want, we as a, board, we don't usually hear, this level of issues. And again, there are a lot of entry points or data points that we look at when giving a contract, right? So, I mean, there's a variety of things. But these are items that, again, they need to be shared with the board in addition to whatever else you may be able to tell us.
If it would help, I could share all the fantastic things in my report rather than other things. If this is an ongoing process that I work with each of my members weekly on any concerns that are brought to me.
Okay.
Commissioner Jantz, I would like a point of clarification, please. It's my understanding that we have not had an agency ombudsman, as you mentioned, President Nigro, for a year and a half. Several meetings ago, the board decided not to attempt to fill that position because there was a statewide resource available for a state ombudsperson who could work with any state employee, and our state employees could use that resource. So, Superintendent Reichman, Assistant Superintendent Rex, have either of you received any complaints or contact from the state ombudsperson regarding issues at ASDB?
No.
This is Commissioner Jantz again. I would like to ask Maria Murphy for her input.
Thank you, Board Member Jantz. I just wanted to offer a little bit of clarification because when the discussion regarding the state ombudsman person was happening several board meetings ago, Superintendent Reichman actually asked me to look into whether we could contract with the state ombudsman's office. And the state ombudsman's office is meant to serve as a liaison between the public and the state of Arizona, specifically for things like open meeting law and public records, specifically administrative acts of the state of Arizona. So the state ombudsman's office does not really, it's not necessarily within their purview to sort of adjudicate or mediate internal employee disputes for state agencies. And I hope that's helpful to you. That's why we did not proceed in that direction.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. I appreciate that clarification. And again, I would like to say that in this situation, I believe it was avoidable had we had an ombudsperson. We did not fill that position, and I do understand that we want to discuss these potential concerns from current employees, and change is difficult. There's always room for improvement. There's always room for positive change. There's always room for negative change to happen as well. Superintendent Reichman and Superintendent Rex have stated their support, and I do think that we also need to consider the negative feedback that we have gotten in addition to that. Superintendent Reichman and Superintendent Rex have information based on their supervision of Mr. Johnson and their professional opinion that should be considered.
I think Dean will first. Dean?
This is Dean. My question is, outside of the ombudsman, is there a formal process for folks to complain about this particular person? And the follow-up question is, has that occurred?
Superintendent Reichman?
This is Superintendent Reichman. We do have a complaint policy, and we also have a grievance policy. The complaint that you received did not go through our formal policy. Rather,
the anonymous
feedback
letter.
was provided directly
Okay.
to a board member anonymously, and it was done over our heads without following our policy.
I'm sorry, what? The complaint, which complaint? Because there's several that we're dealing with, and I think maybe that's the issue. Which complaint are you referring to?
Actually, all of them. We have had no formal complaints that have been filed in adherence with our internal policy. No one has filed a complaint or a grievance. So we have gotten no formal feedback that I, as the superintendent, am aware of or that I'm able to use. The information that I have is what you have.
But there is an EEOC complaint. I mean, we received notice of that last month.
Yes. I do not know what is in that EEOC complaint.
They don't get it.
So I don't have any formal information to work with from that complaint.
Right,
at this
and I don't
point.
either. No one does. One of these anonymous letters you received directly and sent to me. And that is not a formal written complaint, I understand. But that's how that was arose. That's how I was made aware of it.
Right, and this is Superintendent Reichman. Again, the point is, for me, without a formal complaint and information through that policy, I am not able to take any action.
This is Dean again. I have a follow-up question. Superintendent Reichman, are all employees aware of that policy, and do they sign off on that policy?
Yes, they do. This is part of our annual staff training. We have several courses in safe schools, and the complaint procedure is one of them. It is a safe schools course that everyone, myself included, have to take every single year. And that has information about the grievance and the complaint policies. And our EEOC requires that we provide documentation that we are in fact providing that type of training to our employees on an annual basis.
And this is Dean again. I have another follow-up, and I apologize. I'm not trying to commandeer the conversation. But in that same policy, is there a structure to utilize the ombudsman at some point? if we had one.
I don't understand the question.
Let me see if I can kind of clarify a little bit, because I'm a little confused too. At what point does an ombudsman get involved in an issue like what we're dealing with now? Per policy.
Okay, this is Superintendent Reichman. Per our policy, any employee is allowed to contact the ombudsperson at any time if we have an ombudsperson.
It's okay.
I'm good.
Oh, Lynn?
And I think, you know, just feedback that I've gotten, the new, and I'm trying to find the name of the procedure now as far as if a staff member has an issue of any kind, they go to their immediate supervisor, and I can't remember the name of it, but, and then the immediate supervisor takes it on. But if it doesn't go any farther than that, then it will never get to Annette. Annette will never know about these, because they are directed to just go to their immediate supervisor. And we don't know if those concerns go any further than that, or if they're even recognized by any of the higher up the ladder administration. And I think that's where it gets bogged down.
This is Superintendent Reichman. I would like to ask Anita Pyatt to provide some clarification on the complaint policy and the grievance policy as well. But I will say that if someone were to file a grievance, that does go up the chain all the way to me and to the board. Anita, is Anita available to provide some additional clarification? She's not here.
I mean, Superintendent Reichman, I mean, I did help write the ombudsperson policy a while ago. When we simplified, we had 7 or 8 different policies, and we simplified it down to 4. We have complaints, we have grievances for ASDB employees. Grievances involve certain actions, and complaints are more generalized. The ombudsperson exists kind of separately from that, and the ombudsperson's role is to hear the issue and potentially mediate a resolution, but also to redirect that employee to the appropriate step, whether it's a grievance or a complaint, because, you know, we had, as you know, we had complaints being emailed to the board, we had grievances being emailed, and then they thought that was somehow a grievance, but there's a process for all of that. So we wanted the ombudsperson to help, one, to be a sounding board for the board, but then 2, to help people be redirected to their appropriate, formal channel of either grievance or complaint. For ASDB employees, the ombudsperson also interacts with members of the public and with students. Yeah, oh, it's okay, sure.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a couple of thoughts on this, and this is from my experience in state employment. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to trivialize this. However, there's a lot of change going on in ASDB, especially in the co-ops with the redesign. And with change, you get a lot of people who are resistant to change. I do want to say that in looking at the post for Jay's position, there is nothing requiring him to have ASL skills. There's nothing requiring him to have a certificate in HI or VI, and to judge whether or not we give him a contract based on that. We can't do that. We can't do that. I am not saying that there are not concerns that are valid, but I'm also hearing from Dr. Rex that those concerns have been addressed at a supervisory level and handled, and to the point of her satisfaction. So again, I'm not saying we should not be aware of this, but I also don't think what we have in front of us is enough to hold a contract back from an employee who is performing.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other comments? No. Okay, so we can close this
Do we need to?
task and then take a break. If there is, if there is anyone that wants to make a motion, they can.
I would move that we offer Jay Johnson a contract.
Are there any seconds?
This is Dean, I'll second.
All right, so for this one, if we can raise our hands for the ayes. So anyone that votes yes, raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is there, Mike, are you raising your hand? I guess I can't see you.
My hand is up.
Your hand is up. Okay, great. Thank you. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, any noes? And PB. Any noes? Just
No.
me. Just me then. Any abstentions? Lynn. All right. Then we'll take a break and then we'll come back. 10-minute break, please.
I'm assuming that motion passes.
Yes, that motion passes.
The same.
Yeah.
Freezing.
Yes.
My vote was in favor.
Yeah, we'll have to get that back. Have you been, Suke?
It's been crazy. I feel like it's a full moon week.
The full moon week? Yeah, this
It's
is.
not, but it feels like
Yeah,
it.
this, yeah, work has been a little crazy.
Been a little crazy.
All right, let me get the contract loader. Kelly in the open. Hello? I think we should restart when we can.
Are we about ready, we think?
Yeah.
I'm going to unmute the microphones. Hold on.
Okay.
Media, are we ready?
Okay.
Okay, we'll go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, we are back. Can you guys hear me? No. Check. There we go. Excellent. I'm going to try to speak more loudly for the interpreters. I got some feedback during the break, so I'll do my best. I'm not yelling. I'm just trying to respond to feedback. Next up is 6.11, intent to offer fiscal year 2023 employment contract to Kelly Creasy, principal of ASB and ASD Tucson campus, pursuant to ARS 38-431-03A1. The board may vote to go into executive session for the purposes of discussion and consideration of employment matters. Again, the employees themselves have the ability to take what are normally sensitive discussions of employment into the open. My records reflect that Kelly Creasy is elected to have the discussion in the open. Letitia, is that correct? Yes. She's shaking her head. Yes? Yes. So if is anyone that would like to speak on Kelly Creasy? And we're not on Zoom anymore, so you can just speak.
The reason I pulled it was just because of the responses that we had gotten, the public responses, so I felt it was, it could be discussed separately.
Okay. Is there any board member that would like to have discussion on this matter? No? Okay.
This is Board Member James.
Oh, yes. Hello.
I intentionally waited to try to give other people the opportunity to speak. I do want to make a comment from the deaf perspective, the deaf community, and I understand a lot of the comments and the frustrations and the disappointment with her from the deaf community perspective. I would like to offer the perspective of a school administration board that we rely on her to keep our Tucson campus operational. I understand that there have been efforts to provide additional staff to work in tandem with her. It is my understanding that recent situations did not work out, and there is currently a search for additional staff to support her in order to satisfy the needs of the deaf community and to have that deaf culture recognized. We do need to identify that it is a need. It is a need that needs to be filled. But I believe the intention is to fill that position and to fill that need. However, in my professional opinion, since Principal Creasy has kept the institution running, I don't think that it is wise to eliminate her during a critical time in the agency, during a critical time with the addressing of the current shortages that we have and the current pandemic that we're in. My statement isn't necessarily in support or opposition of her, but understanding the position that we need to keep our school running in the best interests of students. And we need to look at not only one aspect of that, but rather the larger picture. So, given that Superintendent Reichman and Assistant Superintendent Rex believe that Principal Creasy is able to fulfill her job duties of running the school, if they can also provide the recommendation of extending her contract, I think we need to take that into consideration. I would just ask the superintendent and assistant superintendent to please take heed of these concerns that have been raised to us and make sure that we provide support to Principal Creasy as necessary, including potentially filling that other principal role or an assistant principal role as soon as possible. This additional position could fulfill the need of the deaf community from that perspective.
Okay, thank you, PV. If there's no other discussion, then I move that we offer Kelly Creasy contract for fiscal year 23 as the principal of ASD and ASB.
This is UK, I second that.
All in favor? Let's raise our hands this time. I have 3. So everyone here is raising their hand. Mike, are you raising your hand? I'll take your word for it. You could tell me you're raising your hand if you're not really.
I actually have both.
Both hands. I'll count that twice. Any opposed? No. And any abstentions? No. Okay. The next item, I believe, is 6.13, which it is. 6.13, consent agenda item, intent to offer school year 2022-2023 teacher employment contracts pursuant to ARS 38-431-03A1. The board may vote to go into executive session for the purposes of discussion and consideration of employment matters. This one was pulled from the consent agenda. Would anyone like to speak on this point?
Can I go ahead and make a motion?
Yeah, you can go ahead if no one else.
I move to accept the intent to offer teacher contracts as listed in 6.13.
I second. All in favor, let's raise our hands again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then, Mike, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I am.
Great, so that's 7. Any no votes? And any abstentions? PV is abstaining. Okay. Next up, 7.01, information discussion item HB 2065 and HB 2066. Maria Murphy, Ms. Murphy.
Good afternoon, Board President Nigro, members of the board, members of the administration. For the record, Maria Murphy, Director of Policy and Government Relations. I'm here to offer you an update on House Bills 2565 and 2566, which are the 2 bills related to ASDB at the Arizona State Legislature during this session. So House Bill 2565 is the ASDB revision bill, which essentially takes the makes the revisions that were in the session law last year and makes them permanent in Title 15. I am pleased to let you know that it was referred to the House Education Committee. It passed out of House Education unanimously last month, and it passed out of the House, not unanimously, unfortunately, 55 to 4. It has gone over to the Senate, and the Senate has referred it over to the Senate Education Committee. We are expecting that it will be heard at the Senate Education Committee here within the next few weeks. In terms of House Bill, well, before I move on to House Bill 2566, does anybody have any questions about 2565? Okay. All right. House Bill 2566 is the bill that is regarding the state institutional voucher. It's essentially the bill that was asking for the additional funding for capital outlay and for transportation. So it was first read in the House and assigned to House Education and Appropriations. I am pleased to let you know that it did pass out of House Education unanimously. Unfortunately, the chair of the House Appropriations Committee did not schedule the bill to be heard. And unfortunately, what that means is because the bill did not pass out of both subcommittees, 2566 in its current iteration is dead for this particular session. It is unfortunate because while all of the appropriations bills do end up getting held at the end of the legislative session because they're negotiated out as part of the greater state budget process, the budget negotiation process, we did want to keep the bill alive for as long as possible in order to raise awareness among the state legislature of the need for this particular funding. Unfortunately, though, well, I guess fortunately, legislators do have their personal priorities. There's a lot of bills that need to be heard, and it is the chair's prerogative to set the agenda. Unfortunately, there just wasn't enough time to hear the bill in the Appropriations Committee this year. The good news is that the chair of the Appropriations Committee did agree that this is going to stay on her list for budget negotiations at the end of session. So we know that this is going to be brought up, and hopefully it will be included in the kindergarten to 12 BURB, the budget reconciliation bill, at the end of session. I am also working very closely with the prime sponsor of 2566 and other legislators to figure out if there's a way for us to possibly resurrect the bill using another bill as a striker vehicle. No decisions have been made yet exactly on how we're going to do that, but I am meeting with a group of legislators on Monday morning to start having those discussions. I am also going on a parallel track and meeting with legislators one-on-one to educate them on this issue and to educate them on how critical the need is for the funding for this particular issue, and also to request that individual legislators please place this on their list of budget priorities for the end of the legislative session when it comes time to develop the budget reconciliation bills. So this is a little bit of a setback, but we are continuing to move forward, and we are continuing to do everything that we can to raise awareness of the issues over at the legislature. And with that, I'd like to make myself available for any questions about the bills.
Are there any questions for Ms. Murphy? No? Okay. Seeing none, we can move on to 7.03. Discussion and action item, urgent approval of revised policy JF student admissions. Marie Murphy.
Okay, that's me. You have before you the red line for policy JH admissions. It was posted to the website. I have not received any public comment on this particular policy. I did have several board members individually reach out to me with some questions about this particular policy, and in the interest of making sure that we're abiding by open meeting law, I'd just like to go ahead and start the discussion on policy JH so I can answer those questions for the whole group.
Are there any? I know I have a question,
Yes.
but so at least on the 30-mile radius rule.
Yes.
So on that one, that's new. We from time to time have had students from Casa Grande, from Maricopa, from the eastern parts of Mesa and Gilbert, and what would be considered the East Valley and Metro Phoenix, attend PDSD. And, so we haven't had that hard line of 30. And I don't think it's appropriate. And why don't I think that? There should be a hard line at some point. We can't move a child from Yuma to PDSD every day, or to ASD every day. But nevertheless, we're missing a lot of Arizonans by drawing that 30-mile radius, if it's a hard radius. And if their child, if the least restrictive environment is PDSD, if that child needs a campus where they're taught instruction in ASL and their peers have ASL and the staff use ASL, there's very limited options. I think there's one other school in Maricopa County, and there's one other down in Pima, and then there's the schools operated by the agency. So, and we certainly have to weigh that against sitting on a bus for a long time in Metro Phoenix. I completely understand that. But the parents are part of the IEP team too, and parents can make that choice if that's what they want for their child. If attending, this school, all things considered, if attending this PDSD or ASD, really is the least restrictive environment for them, and they're willing to make that sacrifice of several hours on a bus a day, which again is not optimal. But the other choice may not be optimal if they're in their smaller community and they may be the only ASL user in their school or in their district, or one of very few. I think we have to make some sort of gray area between 30 and 50 miles. Then have that hard thing. I know that there's transportation issues. I know that that's logistically difficult to do, but that's why we have a good staff to do that. They're really good at logistics, and I have every faith that they're going to be able to accomplish that. Have you thought of ways that we can change that 30-mile rate? Or if there are other board members that disagree, speak now. Go ahead.
Thanks, President Niger. I agree with you. I think just maybe one consideration, I would personally rather have the policy reflect that distance has to be a consideration in the discussion of placement, but I'm a bit concerned about setting a firm mile boundary for making those decisions. It needs to be based on the student's need and the determination through the IEP team about appropriate placement and least restrictive environment. So personally, I think it makes more sense to have the policy be more general in terms of giving the directive that it needs to be a consideration as placement is determined, but have the mileage, at least a firm number, left out of that.
So my response to both of your comments would be, yes, I have taken that into account, and I do have some alternative language that I can propose. What I can tell you is that in the creation of this particular policy, we had a group of subject matter experts trying to figure out what is this line between what is a reasonable amount of time for a child to be on a bus versus what is potentially not a reasonable amount of time. The 30-mile radius was selected because 30 miles essentially covers the majority of Maricopa County, so it would keep everybody within the Phoenix area able to go on a daily basis to PDSD. And hang on, I have maps here. But essentially, if we're looking at possibly extending out to 40 or 50 miles, so for instance, 50 miles could mean a child from Nogales being driven every day all the way to Tucson. It could mean a child from Casa Grande being driven all the way down to, Tucson or to potentially Phoenix. And we do have students right now who are being transported age as young as 2.5 hours each way. And that's a long time for a 3-year-old to be in a car to go to school every day. So I certainly do understand and I respect parental choice. I think that our subject matter experts were trying to look at also what was in the best interest of that child. but I do have some sample language to give you, but I see that Sue Kay was going to ask
ahead.
a question, so let me answer her before I
So,
propose the sample language.
so my question is, if you kept the hard line, is there a process in place that a parent could seek a waiver to that policy?
So that's an excellent question, Sue Kay. And so what I was proposing after I received some questions from individual board members about this, some of the language that I was considering changing was to say that students who are residing within a 30 to 50 mile radius shall be considered for day student status on a case by case basis, and that the placement team shall discuss distance and geographical location as one consideration in the decision for admission and placement. But I also do want to caution you all that related services transportation, it's already part of the IEP discussion when you're looking at placing a child. But what we would basically be doing is saying, okay, we're setting a 30-mile radius, but if you're 31 miles or 35 miles, we will take a look at that on a case-by-case basis. And I don't want to speak for Albert. Albert, you can feel free to pop up here anytime you like. But that was sort of the compromise language that I tried to draft to address some of the board questions, but also to address some of the operational concerns that I know transportation has. So, please.
Thank you, Board President and members of the board. I'll make myself available to answer any questions regarding the operations side of transportation. Thank you, Maria. And how long a student is on a bus or a vehicle.
So, yeah, if students on the bus for 32 miles or 35 miles, how much, what's the marginal difference in time on the bus?
That would all depend because we go curb to curb.
Mm-hmm.
So it all depend on the actual specific location of that student. So even if having that 32, for example, getting 32 right off a freeway versus 32 miles into the center of Tucson, that could be a very different amount of time that you're on the bus. And that all depends where the student is actually currently located.
Mm-hmm.
So to say one way or the other, I couldn't give definitives, and I'd hate to tell you one way or the other. But ultimately, it would be a matter of just a few minutes for the most part.
Right, because to me, PDS. We know where the schools are, and we know where we're getting these students who are further away. They're in Casa Grande or Maricopa that are right near major highways, right?
Not always.
Not-
For example, I have a student that lives 17 miles off the road of Pomerine.
Okay.
That I'm currently picking up every day, and in order to do that, it has to be essentially chauffeur transportation. It is one
Mhm.
staff member in a vehicle to go pick that child up. So the entire allocated cost of that one staff member, which is essentially for that, which eats up
Sure.
almost the entire voucher fund that we would need for the rest of education aspect.
Right.
And so there is the financial component of it. Obviously, that shouldn't drive our decision of what's best for students,
Mhm.
but it is an aspect that must be considered. But it is not always right off the freeway from this particular area.
Right. I guess I don't mean to imply that it's always off the freeway, but the idea that we're bringing people from further out as we leave the metro area, we get into more rural areas that have generally roads with higher speed limits.
Once again, all
Yeah,
depends.
not in East Mesa, I suppose. Not in East Mesa, not in parts of Gilbert that would be at the 32 or 33 mile mark.
Correct. And so in that 30-mile mark, you're absolutely correct. You're in the major metropolitan area. As you go further out, you're more in the rural areas of the state. Just for some comparisons, though, I'd like to go ahead and give some ideas of what it looks like from
Sure.
our district, what we're proposing versus what others have. So if you take every school district in the state of Arizona and come up with the averages, the average square miles of a district that is within the state of Arizona is 573 miles. The median is actually 282. The proposed 30-mile boundary is actually, is 2,827 square miles as just a reference point.
The largest district in the state of Arizona is 4,413. A 50-mile radius is 7,854 square miles. And with this, it would be 2. So as a whole, we're looking at just close to 15,000 square miles of operating service with a 50-mile radius. So just as a comparison, as an average of 500 versus 15,000. So, which is something we're more than capable of taking care of. It's just a matter of having more one-on-one service.
Right, it is certainly, right, much larger, which is, part of the reason why we're asking for more transportation money. But 50, I don't know that, if anyone's suggesting that that hard number be 50, but rather that we not have a hard number, that transportation, distance is taken into consideration. Or maybe we have a hard number that's really big, but we're gonna, again, if it's 40 miles or 35 miles, the parents have to understand that that's gonna be an issue, and they may not, they may not wanna do that, or they might, I don't know.
Absolutely, and I'll turn my time over right after Sue, which is, that is part of IDEA Section B, which is related services, so that is discussed. But I do agree with you, David, as far as a hard number. We know through different various studies that the longer a student is on transportation, the lower their education becomes, or educational access becomes, in the sense of homework, after-school activities, etc. So I do think that a hard number and having a boundary definitely creates that interest of, okay, this student is too far, and in the best interest of the student, we would recommend a different avenue for the least restrictive environment for education.
That's okay.
So I have two thoughts. My first one is I kind of like the alternative language that you've proposed, Maria, with the 30-mile hard line and the 30 to 50 case by case, as long as that is not the only deciding factor. But my second is more of a question, and I'm just wondering if there is anything nationally that's considered a best practice as far as how many hours a kid should be in transportation to and from school.
Different various studies, I get different answers. Usually it's under 60 minutes from what I see. What we're proposing here is mostly right around 2 hours as a maximum. But different studies have different results for that. There's Arizona conducted a study regarding that back in the 90s to determine mostly the closure of rural schools and consolidating those downs and the effect of long-term transportation. They didn't have anything that was quantifiable to say, yes, this was the outcome of making that decision, as there's so many other related aspects to that. So I think it's just more of trying to put yourself in the shoes of the student. Of if we're talking about a 7:30 a.m. start time, that means if it's a 2-hour distance, it's a 5:30 a.m. pickup time, which means report time for my staff is at 3:30 in the morning in order to make it out to that location. And then that means that that student is not getting home until roughly 5:30 or 6 p.m. And in Phoenix, where we start at 8 a little later, that's a pickup time of about 6 a.m. So a little bit easier on the students, but when we're talking obviously with preschool, elementary, that's a pretty difficult aspect. But I agree with you in the sense that having that discussion in the IEP as Section B is something that is prominent there. I think the intent of this was to firm up that definition with the aspect of us now being an LEA and now being solely responsible for transportation of our students, whereas in the past it was a partnership between us and the district. And this obviously includes mostly that 30% increase that we saw in our transportation load, give or take, from the LEA status change. And I think that's the overall intent. If there's another aspect that the board feels would be a better way to do that, I'm open to hear those options. But I think it's best interest for those students of not being on a bus more than 2 hours.
Go ahead. Thank you. This is Board Member Jantz. I would like to say that this comment is near and dear to my own upbringing. I spent a lot of time on the bus every day growing up in a rural town, needing to travel back and forth to the larger city. To drive myself to get to campus might have been 20, 25, 30 minutes, depending on how much I sped as a young person. But on the bus, it took about an hour to get there. And I would arrive home probably 2.5 hours or so daily after school. And that was not a great experience. It was truly awful, to the point where when I got my driver's license, I would count my pennies to get gas, anything to avoid riding that bus, everything possible. With that aside, I've been a part of many IEP discussions as a counselor and advocating for those deaf, hard of hearing students. Before ASDB had that LEA designation, the problem was, a district would say you must go to PDSD or ASDB campus, and they may not have supported a student because the student would have been on a bus for over an hour, sometimes 2 hours daily. And so I have done my research where I need to find that case law to say that it's unreasonable to force a child to ride a bus for more than 45 minutes. It's unreasonable. That being said, I think that 30-mile radius is an agreeable approach. And I do like the language that says when the home residence of the student is 30 miles outside of the radius of campus, that impacts daily transportation and it is not reasonable. The dorm team should meet to figure out appropriate placement for that student in order to meet those concerns. I feel like this is open language with what we've been provided here. If the 30-mile radius isn't necessarily big enough, we could include language that would instead have a time limit for what would be considered too far, where we would then recommend dorm placement as a better fit for that student. The last thing that we want to do is force parents or force kids to feel like they have to ride that bus for an extremely long period of time on a daily basis. If instead they have the option to take advantage of the dorm program, they should be able to make that choice.
Can I ask a question? Oh, yeah. Just one question that I had, just the language in that paragraph, just trying to get a little bit closer to the intent of it. So it's written in a format that presents both the first bullet and the first sub-bullet as shoulds. So items for consideration in the discussion around admissions, but then the second sub-bullet is a shall, so it's providing a hard limitation. So is the intent that the 30-mile or 50 in this case, that those are primary considerations but not solely limiting factors, and that is a piece of the conversation, or that if you are, in this case, outside of 30 miles, you are either placed at the Tucson campus or remain in your district?
Would you like to go ahead and answer the chat? Yeah.
Sure. So it is my understanding from the subject matter experts that the 30-mile radius was intended to be directive, that it was intended to be a hard line of a 30-mile radius, which is part of the reason why I drafted the language of the 30 miles being the hard line, and then 30 to 50 being on a case-by-case basis under consideration by the IEP team. So with the new language that I'm proposing, there's a hard line and the ability beyond the 30 miles to allow for deeper discussion and to say, is this the least restrictive environment, a day school, or do we want to look at possibly a residential placement?
Thank you.
So that's my understanding of what the subject matter experts wanted.
I do like the language of the 30 to 50 miles with the consideration at the IEP team meeting. I think that's a team decision, including the parents. We don't force anybody to do anything. It is a team decision, and if the parents feel comfortable with that, and again, like we tell all of our parents during IEP meetings, an IEP is a fluid document. We can have a new IEP meeting at any time, and if you change your mind, we can do that, but bottom line is we need to look at least restrictive environment in the programming for the student. and what kind of education they're getting, if they have peers who are using the same language. There's so much involved in that decision. It's not clean cut. So I think if we could keep that, and I don't think there's going to be that many. Yeah, like.
And we do understand that it is a very delicate balancing act between being very respectful of what the parents would like to see, and we're also, as the subject matter experts and the educators, trying to act with what's in the best interests of the child. Because we know that it's not necessarily in the best interests of a 3-year-old to be on a bus or in a car for 5 hours a day when they're already looking at an 8-hour school day. So what we are trying to do here, what I tried to do with this compromise language, was to balance that fine line between respecting the parental decision, but also making the parents aware.
Right.
And to hopefully have the IEP team come to a collective decision on what's in the best interests of that particular student.
That discussion needs to be had at the IEP team meeting, and let the team decide what's best for. That's why we call it an individual education plan. So.
Okay. Thank you. And Superintendent, do you have your hand up?
No.
No. Oh,
No, I
okay.
don't.
Sorry. I just want to make sure. Suke?
Is this an action item?
Yeah, so it is, so, and again, maybe we should have addressed this on the front end. This, because enrollment for next year is kind of already happening now, you know, the idea would be that we suspend our normal first read rule, so we need a motion to do that. And then we would need to vote on adopting it, right away today, you know, potentially with, Ms. Murphy's proposed language.
So I move. Go ahead.
Two other quick things before
Okay.
we make the motion.
Sure.
Just two small things that I noticed in there that I'd like to propose changes to. In the section on students eligible for admissions consideration, one of the requirements is that a student must have a current IEP. I think it would just be helpful to either remove the current IEP language or clarify. We just don't want to have a situation with a student who has a MET but is coming out of state and doesn't have a current IEP, isn't eligible for admission. Just again wanting to ensure that we're not unnecessarily limiting. And then I think just the other quick recommendation, in the referrals, evaluations, and placement considerations section, the last sentence of the second paragraph, stating that ASDB is the final determinant of whether placement is appropriate. I would just recommend and like to move that into a separate paragraph below. The paragraph that it's in is talking about initial placement, ensuring that documentation is received within 15 days from the district that's referring over, whereas that final determinant is about a student that ASDB is doing the placement and evaluation determination for. So I think it would just be clear if it said that it's like just a separate sentence below with a continued placement language, just to clarify those two.
Okay. That sounds good. And we have Ms. Murphy's language about there on the record, so we know.
Would you like me to read it to you, just for the purposes of the motion?
Just for the purposes of the motion to read it, I want to make it real clear to everyone, because we don't, have like, we're not on Zoom, so I can't bring up the Word document.
Do you want us to move to and vote on reading it just the one time first?
We can do that. We can do that now to suspend the first read policy, and then Ms. Murphy can read her amendment along with Mr. Wonder's amendment.
So I move that we suspend the first read policy on this, on revised policy JF.
All right. Second?
I second. Board Member
Okay.
Jantz.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's Mike. Okay. And then just for the record, Ms. Murphy, Mr. Wonders has read his amendment, so we understand what it is. If you can read yours quickly.
Yes, I will be adding the language, students residing within a 30 to 50 mile radius shall be considered for day student status on a case by case basis. The placement team shall discuss distance and geographical locations as one consideration in the decision for admission and placement.
Okay, thank you. I move that we adopt the policy, oh, sorry. Okay,
I
sure.
do have a question, point of clarification. This is Board Member Jantz. If a student is within the, well, let's say less than the 30-mile radius, however, the transportation would still take over an hour, is there a consideration that needs to be given to placement at the Tucson campus in that case?
As that would be section for the IDEA subsection B, that would be discussed within that, and if they noticed that the particular location was within 30 miles, but a difficult location to get to, and it was determined that it would take over an hour, it would be discussed. But underneath this reading is that if it's under 30 miles, it would not qualify for any other further discussion other than left up to ASDB in order to work through those details to confirm transportation. Now, I would like to say, though, 30 miles, for the most part, there would be very few instances that we would see something over roughly an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and a half. That would be very, very rare. Most of those would be an hour or under. We do strive for that in our major metropolitan regions, especially in the Tucson area. Phoenix, getting over to East Mesa is a little more difficult, especially on the US 60 during rush hour. So that may be under 30 miles, but due to rush hour traffic and other conditions, it may exceed that 1 hour period of time. But obviously, transportation would be discussed during the IEP placement meeting.
This is Board Member Jantz. I just wanted to make sure that parents would be aware that they do have a choice. If they do feel that that transportation process is taking too long, that they know that they have the choice to place their child at the residential program in Tucson as well. So I'm not sure how that could be brought to a parent's attention.
Well, this would actually, if they were within that 30-mile area, not allow them to be into the dorm placement at that point, as they would qualify for daily transportation, is my understanding of how this would be interpreted. But that is a good point of clarification.
Actually, I would like to clarify that the policy as it's written right now says day students should reside within a 30-mile radius, so it's permissive, it is not mandatory.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, I move that we adopt the policy as amended by Mr. Wonders and Ms. Murphy in their prior readings.
I second.
All in favor? Raise your hand.
Aye.
And Mike on the phone?
Yep. I'm here, I say aye.
Aye, okay. All any opposed? And any abstentions?
Commissioner Jantz, I abstain.
Okay. Thank you. Next up is 8.01, call the public on non-agendized items. Similar to the earlier one on agendized items, Suke will read just the brief note on it.
I just want to reiterate that all comments are accessible on the website given in the agenda for this meeting and will remain public for several months. These are public comments, and the board has not reviewed these comments for factual accuracy, and the viewpoints expressed in these comments are in no way indicative of the viewpoints of ASDB, its leadership, or the board. There were 4 public comments on non-agendized items, and they were the summary of those 4 comments. I took notes. 2 were concerned about the redesign and transparency and communication, and would like to see more clarity on that end. 1 was specific to requiring Kelly Creasy to learn American Sign Language, and the 3rd was a general comment, or a comment from audiologists feeling concerned about the misrepresentation at the work study session, that there was a blanket statement made about about audiologists being able to connect community audiologists with families.
Thank you, Suke. 8.02, discussion possible action item, agenda items for the next regular board meeting scheduled for May 5th, 2022 in Phoenix. Are there any board members like to comment on this?
Board Member Jantz.
Okay.
I would like to reinstate the discussion about the ombudsperson position. I think it has been demonstrated that we do need to take action, and I would encourage us to move forward with that process. It does seem to be evident that we need an ombudsperson within the agency, so I'd like to have that conversation about how we can proceed, and if that person is to report directly to the board, it's critical for staff to have an individual that they feel that they can trust, and that they have options for mediation as needed.
Okay, thank you, PV. Any others? Okay, then we can go to 9.01, action item adjournment. We,
I move that we adjourn this meeting.
okay.
Somebody jump in.
Second.
And Suke seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There we go. PV's opposed. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, we will see you next time.
Sign out?
Heading out next week to see my. Who can do that?